Hi, Terry Caliendo from Dedicated Managers here again. I just really wanted to take a time out here and really emphasize how awesome this setup is as far as just getting things done quickly, implementing various things that would normally take a lot of work and getting them done real quick. So what I wanted to show, this is the Firebase database, and we'll see things flash when I make changes. You've seen that before if you're watching the videos straight through. And then this would be a user on one machine, and then this would be a user on another machine somewhere else. They could be, in the same office. They could be in different parts of the world, wherever. You consider them two different users. So we really just want to show at a top level that I can make a change anywhere. If I update that there, it gets updated real time over here and in the database. So everything is constantly in sync. So if this user types, wants to change the name to Tom, he sees it over here in this other part of the world, and then he can change it back, and they can fight all day long, real time. So there's very little chance that anybody's going to write over anybody's data. The other thing that's really awesome is just how well these selects work together. If I was to implement this real-time thing in like JQuery, the old school model, the way to do that, you'd have to add each one of these to the domain model, through code. Then you'd have to listen and select. And when that change came through, you'd have to try and find this item over here with code, and then you'd have to use regular expressions to try and find which one it is, and then set that one as active and selected. And it's just with jQuery in the old days, which I'm calling the old days now, which is probably still 5 years ago. Just getting into this stuff is really amazing to see how easy it is to manipulate data. And the reason it is because Vue is I don't know if they bill it as this, but to me it's data first. Or data is separated from the visual front end in such a way that the Vue takes care of all the changes for me. All I have to do is change the data, and then Vue handles the updates. That's just unbelievable to see those three change across all of them all at once. And let me show you just how little code it actually took to do that. So let's go into the code. And I'll start here at the client view, and we'll just see that this is that select box. And I ran through most of it in another video, so I won't explain what's exactly going on. But all you have to do is know that, oh, nope, I was wrong. Sorry. This is the select box. This is that's the date picker. This is the select box. That's all the code it takes to create that select box. You see there's no options. I don't have to do with the individual options. That actually all comes in through the data. So I just send it a variable or an object that has the different options, and it's going to handle updating and everything for me through that data model, which is just awesome. It's called reactive, so that when the data model changes, this front end of this will change automatically. So it's just this piece of code which works on this variable, and this is a static variable right now, the client type intake values. I'll show that real quick. So this is just, you can make it an array or an object depending on what you want to send to it. But I'm just sending an array, and I'm making it static right now. Ultimately, this will be called from the database, which will be just a few lines of code. But forget about that for now. The data exchange, it happens through this V model, or the real-time exchange that goes from 1, 2 between the three, happens with this data variable here. And so that is just simply, I'll highlight it and we'll go down and look for it. It's just simply, we're down in the computed section, the computed variables, and there it is there. It's simply a getter and a setter, and the getter is gets the value initially. It gets the current primary relative caregiver object, which it contains all of this information, the entire information for the form. I store it in one variable, and the getter simply reaches out to the store and gets that. I have this is a long piece of code because initially this object is empty, and I get an error if I try and look for client type at intake, which is the the client type. If I try and access that before this data portion of this object is set, you get errors. So basically, I just do a little check and say, hey, has this primary relative caregiver, this object, been populated yet? Because it's asynchronous. When the front end is loaded, I haven't reached out to the store asynchronously to get this variable populated yet with the user's information. So if I want to just this information, the Terry Lee last primary, that stuff is filled in asynchronously. So the display, the view will show up first, and then it'll reach out the back end. This part here, this getter, will reach out to the store, which will then reach out to to get the information. Actually, that's not quite the process. There's actually a created here that reaches out, and this reaches out to the store after the view is shown. This reaches out and says, hey, go and get all the information for this guy, and then populate it into all these variables. But as far as we're talking about in this video, just getting back to the simplicity, this getter just reaches to the store, the global storage, which is connected to the to Firebase, and just gets me what I need. Ultimately, it's connected to the Firebase. And then here for setting it, so when someone makes a change on the front end, when I go from here to here, that's a change. That fires this set, because the variable value changed. That fires this set function, which then I just call the storage, the store, and I dispatch a change to say, hey, go and update that that part of the current primary relative caregiver object. Update that object by object, which means I'm sending it an object. I can send it this this object here. I can make the object more complex and have it have multiple properties. So, but I mean, ultimately, let's just get back to the beginning. Once again, I'm being quite verbose. The code required to make that happen is simply a select here. Then I tie. This is the select. I tie that client type at intake variable back to the storage and ultimately to Firebase through this piece of code here. And when it sets it, it calls this update current primary relative caregiver by object. And I make my variable names pretty long, just to be clear. Ultimately, I'll probably shrink that down a little bit. But so now if we go to storage, and here is that function here, that's the function that's being dispatched to or called. It is in my actions sections. Actions are asynchronous that you dispatch to. Mutations are synchronous that happen immediately right away. So this can actually happen right away, but then I call a asynchronous thing, so that's why it needs to be in the asynchronous section. Anyway, so getting back, we set when that select gets changed, it calls this set, which then updates my current primary caregiver on the local storage, and then it reaches out to Firebase, which is the function below, and says, hey, Firebase, take that current primary relative caregiver object and go and update its values, all of them. I'm doing them all at once right now. Everything in the data section, which is that entire form. I'm doing that all at once. Ultimately, I should knock that down to, just when one field is updated, update that particular field, but it's set up right now to do that, where I can get more granular later. That's why I'm sending that object from the other one. Anyway, so that's pretty much the extent of the code that it takes, other than setting up initially, the Firebase object, which is quite simple. I've shown that in other videos. I'll show it here in a second. But that's it. I mean, it's literally it's this line of code, this line of code, and then these two functions that I reuse over and over. that's it. That's all it takes. And you know, Vue handles on the front end, and that's where it makes it so much different from JQuery. The old way of thinking with JQuery is Vue just handles that data and updates the view based on the data change. So I am not doing any of the work as far as when this is changed from 6 to 1. When I click on this, the work that goes on to figure out on this side, hey, something changed, what changed, where do I update it, what do I update it to, how do I find the you know, the object, the DOM object, and subsequently update it. I mean, the amount of work that used to take was just a lot of code, and it was a lot of painstaking code. And now it's just all done in a few lines of code, and it's just awesome. The Vue takes care of the making it look good. Or I'm sorry, Vuetify makes it takes care of making it look good. Vue handles the data in the back end and then just tells the screen to update. And Firebase handles that, you know, the asynchronous communication to keep everything updated. I don't have to do anything when in the code when this changes. You know, I've got listeners on this side that are just a basic line of code that tells it to update that. I should probably point that out. I guess there is another object when it's created. I got to look for it here. This is another piece of information that get primary. Hang on, I got to look at this for a second. All right, so yeah, here is the, so I was talking about, you know, I lost my track here, but I'm back. I had to stop and think for a second here. When this gets changed here and it fires over here, this happens by just the tie in initially setting up the object and then passing it to over here. This side has a listener, so there is one more piece of code. And that listener is up in up here, and so when I set up the object, I just put a listener. When I get the initial information, that gets put in this variable, which is now a listener that gets called anytime an update happens. And so when that update happens, I pass it to you know, I recommit the data, and that's what updates it. That's a whole nother thing to talk about, and I think I talked about it in another video. If I haven't, just let me know and I'll go back and make that video. But regardless, I mean, the amount of code to get all this to happen relative to what it used to take with you know, setting up the database, setting up the fields, and setting up that communication, and then and once it's set up, that's a new word, whence, am I back in the 1850s? Once it's set up, you know, making that change happen over here, I don't have to, I'm not doing any of that. It's doing it for me. It's just all of it's done on the back end. I'm just calling objects and setting up listeners. It's just, life is so much easier. It's actually fun to program again. I don't have to think about, you know, browser differences. I don't have to think even, because I'm using a development environment, and it's using Webpack, I don't have to think about, you know, differences in JavaScript versions. It's all being transpiled back to an old enough version that most browsers can handle. So it's all, I mean, you're programming to get things done as opposed to solving minute problems. You're programming to get the overall goal achieved, and it's happening much faster. So just a quick, you know, timeout to say, hey, this is, hopefully that was helpful to re-see things from, you know, the forest from the trees, right? We're trying to back up and get out of the trees and see the forest. So, and any other bad colloquialism you want to put in there, if it's a colloquialism, whatever the phrase thing is. Anyway, so Terry Caliendo, thanks for paying attention to me. Again, you know, if anything that wasn't clear, I just kind of do these videos off the cuff. I record them a couple times until I get it to a point where it's almost intelligible. I know I said about 1 million times, so I didn't record this one too many times. Anyway, if you I'll just keep doing that to annoy you. If you you know, if you have any questions, I know it's not extremely clear everything I do. I'm just trying to point things out. Just throw them in the comment section. and let me know, and I'll try and update in other videos, or maybe I'll go back and update this video or add an add-on or something. So Terry Caliendo, thanks a lot, Dedicated Managers. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.